Late one night in the studio, I like to, bug Pete as much as I could, especially when he's watching his favorite TV shows.
One night, we're sitting around watching bad TV, and that's when it happened. Kevin drew a turtle standing on its hind legs with nunchaku strapped to its forearms and with a bandana-style mask. And he showed it to me, and he says, "Hey, this is a Ninja Turtle." And I was like, "Yeah, great." And so I had to do my own version, and I changed just a couple of things.
And of course, I had to top him, so I did a sketch of 4 in pencil, and each one had different weapons and this dramatic pose, and had to put the comic title above, Ninja Turtle.
He handed that to me, and I inked that. Sometime around that point, I suggested, well, why not add Teenage Mutant to the name? It had a kind of rhythm to it.
Dude, we have to come up with a story that tells how these characters became the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We were both huge fans of the underground publishing movement. You go back to Zap Comics, Robert Crumb, Kitchen Sink, Ripoff Press, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. A lot of that stuff we had both seen and enjoyed in head shops and that kind of stuff you could find.
We realized pretty early on in our friendship that we each had strengths to complement the other.
I brought sort of the layout and the dynamic sort of Jack Kirby-isms that sort of paced out the story this way. He brought a lot of great subtle nuances to the story, certainly in the script, I think, more than anything else. And his artwork style was much more refined, much more detailed.
Kevin was really good at color, and he had a really powerful color sense, and I was terrible at it.
Peter didn't do much painting. He did mostly, the most amazing line work and detailed work you could imagine. So I did up a couple roughs. This is probably the one I finally selected before we did this piece here in the studio. This was the first color painting of the turtles done back in 1984. We decided early on that we'd have some of us on each page, like whether we penciling or inking or whatever. There was a bit of each of us on each page, and it got to be where sort of we couldn't see where I sort of left off and where he started, and vice versa.
It took us about 2.5 months to actually complete the entire thing, and borrowed some money from Kevin's uncle, and took whatever money we had ourselves, which wasn't a whole lot, and managed to scrape that all together and print 3,000 copies.
In 1984, this comic comes out, created by these two guys who love all the same stuff, but have very different perspectives. One of them is more outgoing, interested in the violent side, the more emotional side of things. The other one is a lot more introverted, calmer, more intellectual in terms of storytelling, in terms of art style. But they're both fans of the same kinds of comics.
One of the strange things about that first issue of the Turtles is it sent a very strong and different message. It didn't feel like a mainstream comic. There was something about it. And the fact that it was a slightly wrong size also gave a slight sense of edginess. It didn't feel like it was coming from a factory.
What that first issue does is comment on everything that's going on in superhero comics at the time.
What's interesting, when the first issue came out, it was dubbed as a parody, and it was in a big way. It was like Dave Sim, when he started with Cerebus, he drew this funny little barbarian Aardvark that was this barbarian drawn in this style of Barry Windsor Smith when he did Conan. What worked with Cerebus, and we tried to capture too, is that Cerebus just had a lot of depth and character, and Dave progressed the story along and made it interesting, and that's why he kept so many readers for 300 issues. And with us, we really aped a lot of like Frank Millerisms and Daredevil-isms. I mean, you look at the origin, the hand in Daredevil, we have the foot. Splinter is based on Stick. We really pulled some of our favorite bits from some of our favorite comics, and whether you call it, homage or whatever.
So yes, they were making fun of the ninja trend. They were making fun of the overblown Frank Miller dialogue. They were making fun of the dynamic poses of Jack Kirby. but it was all with great love, great heart, great affection. And that's one of the reasons why the comic worked. It was real. It was passionate. And that, you know, come on, that just shoots out of the pages.
I am often asked, why did you kill your main villain off in the first issue? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the reason is that we never really thought we'd be doing a second one. This was done completely for fun, for the passion of wanting to do comics, and you know, nothing about it was planned beyond how do we do a 40-page comic and make it at least halfway decent.
After the first 3,000 were gone, there were more orders, and so we printed more, and then we sort of figured out, like, well, you know, again, because we don't have a lot of other distracting paying work, it's like, let's do an issue 2. Let's continue to tell stories of these characters we created and try to make a living at something we've both dreamed about our entire life, which is to write and draw and tell our own comic stories.
The second issue came out, it felt like it was aimed at people like me. However, in ordering the comic and putting the comic on the stands, you began noticing that all kinds of people you wouldn't quite expect to pick up the comic were picking it up.
At the time we started work on issue 2, I was living in Portland, Maine, and Pete was living in Sharon, Connecticut. And we'd done the pre-orders through the distribution system for how many copies that they'd want to buy for issue 2, and the orders came in at 15,000.
And very quickly, by the third or fourth issue of the Turtles, it was selling more than the Avengers in this store. So there was something going on. In many ways, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started what became then known as the black and white boom. And by 85, 86, it was mind-boggling how many we were selling.
Doing the numbers on the second issue, the first printing of that back in, I think it was late 84, and realizing that Kevin and I would each make $2,000 profit.
And Pete faxed me this note, and at 15,000 copies, you know, total cost involved would end up with roughly $4,000 profit.
And it was a great feeling, you know, to get to that point in life when what you really want to do turns out to be what you need to do. 2,000 for you, 2,000 for me. We do this every 2 months. You know, we can make a living drawing comics. So I literally packed up my bags and moved out of Portland and moved down to Connecticut when we then went ahead and finished issue 2. You know what was cool, when we did the first issue of the Turtles, and we kind of knew who the characters were. We knew their personalities. I mean, Raphael was kind of loosely based on me, and Donatello was kind of loosely based on Pete. But it was 40 pages. So you really didn't get to know the characters well enough. You get to, they were sort of introduced. When we started working on the second, third, and fourth issue, the cool part was that we really had to develop these characters. We had to know them better than anybody so we could write them. And so, like I guess any writer, you kind of pull from all of these influences around you. Your crazy Uncle Bert, your sister this, an ex-girlfriend. For example, April was designed and written after a girl that I had dated in high school, and then we got married later and stuff. But she was a big inspiration for that character, at least in name. She didn't look exactly like her. She did in later issues. Raphael, who's kind of the crazy, the hothead, and people that the rest of the group think he's crazy, to have Raphael meet somebody crazier. And so I started coming up with some ideas for a vigilante character. That was not like, most vigilante characters where a whole family was killed. There was some huge tragic event in their life that got them to either put on a suit or whatever and strike out on their own to take justice on the bad guys. And so I came up with this guy, I like this name, Casey Jones. He didn't have this huge tragedy that affected his will to fight bad guys. It was because he watched too much bad TV. Pete said, what would be really funny is if he had a golf bag. And in the golf bag, he not only had bats, but he had like a golf club, a hockey stick, so he was like an all sports nut. And that really made the whole character perfect. And one of my favorite movies around this time was a movie called Big Trouble in Little China. And I thought Kurt Russell as Jack Burton that's Casey. I mean, that was really a huge inspiration.